If you're wanting to photograph autumn and get the most diverse shots and capture the colors at their most vibrant, then I have 4 things that you need to improve your autumn photography. But I'll also share with you some alternative options if you're on a budget. The first thing we're going to be talking about is filters, because these play such a huge role in everything else that we're going to be talking about today. Starting off with circular polarizers. Now I know the subject is covered a lot on YouTube as if they bring more saturation, but I really want to kind of go a little bit further and explain the difference between polarizers and neutral density filters. So stick with me. When light comes from a direct source like the sun, the light waves are scattered in every direction. And when that light hits a reflected surface like water or leaves, it's reflected in the one direction parallel to that reflected surface. When you use a CP filter and you rotate it, you're matching it to the reflected light particles, and this will help reduce glare. So why do we need one for autumn photography? Well, I don't know if you just caught it, but I did mention leaves. If we look at this first example, we have no polarizer on. So now look at this photo taken with a polarizer. The polarizer reduces the glare on the water and the reflective surfaces of the rocks. You can now see the rocks in the bottom of the waters, being able to see a little bit more through the water. The rocks aren't as hot, or the highlights aren't as hot, so you can see more detail in the rocks themselves. Cutting through the image, we have a lot more of the natural saturation of this backlit tree. So the sun is cutting through the leaves of the trees, and we turn that polarizer so we're able to capture what the scene is supposed to look like without all these reflections. And now they're not always perfect, because if we look in the top right hand corner, we can actually still see some reflection where the polarizer didn't catch. Now I didn't edit these photos, but that is something that you could fix in post. Unlike a CP filter that takes the reflected light and matches it parallelly to reduce glare, a neutral density filter completely stops light from entering your lens, ultimately allowing less light hitting your sensor and giving you much more control over your exposure. But are they better than a CP filter when it comes to autumn photography? If we look at the CP filter photo on the left and the ND photo on the right, we can see there is still a decent amount of reflection on the surface of the water and the trees with the ND photo. Pulling up the photo with no filter, we can see that the ND still provides a boost in vibrance and saturation, but not to the effect that a CP filter provides. Now, certain filter systems do allow you to stack these on top of each other. So if you have the option to actually combine them, I would recommend doing that if you're shooting in a really hot scene, meaning that there's an extreme amount of reflection or light. If you can only afford to get one option, or you only have one option, I would always go with a CP filter. Now, purchasing these filters can be expensive. There are plenty of different options, and I recommend just getting what you can afford. On the low end, some of them are around $50, and they can go all the way up to a few $100s. Now again, having something is better than nothing, so just get what you can afford. Because with any option that you choose, you're working so hard to capture the vibrancy of these colors during this time of year. You don't want these highlights and reflected surfaces blowing out your photos, not allowing the people looking at your photos, or even you looking at your photos, to be blown out by whites and highlights. We want to see all those saturated colors. Now we need additional tools to pair with these filters to help photograph the autumn landscape in different perspectives. Using a telephoto lens or super telephoto lens can help create much more intimate scenes. And autumn is all about the colors and the details within these woodlands. Fall brings with it moody weather, and you can take photos of the entire landscape like this, but this is more of a snapshot. It's busy, you don't really know where to look. We want to evoke emotion with our photos, so let's zoom in on the tree line so we can get a photo more like this. Now this photo is shot at 600 millimeters. Now that we've zoomed in, we have a much more intimate scene. We can see the different layers and breaks of the tree line. When a viewer looks at this, they're guided through the photo, starting at the bottom, working their way through the top, looking at all the different colors, the greens and blue hues, all the way to the bright highlighted fog and mist. Or we can turn our eye to the forest floor and make sure to capture the small details. I shot this with a 70 to 200, and I was quite a ways back because I wanted to compressed the tree trunk that was a few feet away from this mushroom, bringing it a little bit closer and turning that bokeh of the sunlight cutting through the trees, getting that nice blue bokeh on the right and that greenish orangish bokeh on the left-hand side. And then of course it darkens that whole tree trunk because you have this direct light coming in on the mushroom, capturing this beautiful small detail and even the detail of the cobweb hanging off of it. But because I'm so low to the ground, I'm also able to blur out a little bit of the foreground, almost using the foreground and the background as framing, lining up this shot so that you know exactly where to look and seeing all the detail on the log, from the moss, the rotting log, the mushroom, and the cobweb. This photo is also my 2023 calendar, so if you're interested in pre-ordering it, pre-orders are live now. All that information is in the description below. From here, let's move on to a new way to change perspective. If you have one or you can afford one, drone and aerial shots are a great way to add a new perspective to your autumn photography. These types of shots open up the whole scene, allowing your viewer to understand the entire setting of the place that you're shooting or you're taking a series of photos in. In this extreme wide angle shot taken above one of the hollers, which hollers are these little breaks or ripples within the mountain, we can see this beautiful V shape leading our eye, utilizing the trees in the foreground here, guiding us through the middle of the holler to the mountain range behind us. And this just easily tells our viewers where the photos are taken, giving an overall setting while still allowing our viewer to look through the entire image. Don't forget to turn the camera on your drone down to the ground and use that ultra wide angle lens to capture unique shots of the landscape from the air, especially in the mountains where you have these switchbacks or cutbacks that work through the mountain, adding motion and another layer of depth and dimension. Now coming back to the forest floor, let's throw on a wide angle lens onto our camera and start looking for some small details and woodland scenes. You do have quite a few different options when it comes to wide angle lenses. You have things like a 16-35, 14-24, which you can see right here. There's mine. I also used a 28mm for the longest time. And now if you're shooting on mirrorless cameras, they have telephoto ranges that zoom from a 20mm range all the way to a 100mm or more range. This photo was taken with a 28mm lens. One of the beautiful things about shooting with a wide angle lens is that on the edges you can kind of get a little bit of flare or lengthening. So when you point the camera or tilt it up and down, you can actually make the trees look taller. It just adds a whole new level or perspective to the image. And then of course, so much detail is held within the image. We have the two main trees on the left and the right, directing our attention right to the center of the image. I also wanted to use this type of lens so that I could capture the mist and the highlights on the left side and the right side, again, helping frame the main subject, which is that split trunk tree. And this photo was also shot with that same 28mm lens. I didn't quite have the 14-24 yet. If I did, I would have been able to get, in my opinion, a much more dynamic shot, a lot more detail, more red leaves in front of the tree trunk in the bottom of the photo, and giving me a little bit more room at the top of the tree trunk in the center of the photo. But I chose a wide angle lens for this because I wanted to capture all those details. I wanted to tell the entire story of this piece of wood that was attached to that tree over there, now disconnected, plus the newly fallen red leaves with still green foliage on the ground, and then the orangish dead leaves that guide your way up through the photo to this creepy, eerie tree trunk, and then this blue cast fog that was rolling its way through the woodland, and the sun just starting to peek over the horizon, cutting through, adding a very mystical and ethereal effect to the photo. Now lenses, just like filters and every other camera product, they all come at different price ranges. Now if you're on a budget and you don't really want to spend a whole lot, but you still want some good lenses, because in my opinion, a good lens is way better than an expensive camera. You can get used lenses, and there's also things like third-party lenses. One option for a great inexpensive lens is Rokinon. You can find these lenses for only a few $100s. I know the 14mm is really popular among astrophotographers and landscape photographers. They are manual, there's no image stabilization in them, but if you're setting up your camera on a tripod and you're shooting a woodland scene or you're shooting astrophotography, you shouldn't really need autofocus. Some other third-party lenses are Tamron and Sigma. I just bought this Sigma 14-24 and it was rated almost equally to some of the Canon lenses. A lot of the things that I shoot you're not gonna notice a big difference. And when we're talking about the quality of glass and saving hundreds of dollars, unless you're pixel peeping, no one's gonna notice a big difference between how sharp a twig is on a Canon photo or a Canon lensed photo and a Tamron or Sigma shot photo. And like I said earlier, if you can only afford one lens, get something that covers a wide range. Now the f-stop's not gonna be great, they might be a little bit slower apertures, but you can get something that is anywhere in the 20mm range all the way up to the 100mm range. And lenses hold their value pretty well, so as you practice more and work your way up, you can always turn around and sell this lens and get something more specific to what it is you're trying to shoot. The thing is, knowing what lenses and filters to use to tell a story is one thing, but if you really want to improve your autumn photography, you need to make sure that you're not ignoring this one thing that could be really holding back your autumn photography photos. So go watch this video next to instantly see improvements in your autumn photography.